Hi, I'm Lillian. Welcome back to my channel, Ink and Pages. Today I'm going to be talking you through the 8 books I have read in the past few months. Starting off with my first read of the year, which was Glass Town by Isabel Greenberg. This is a graphic novel about the Bronte siblings, I guess specifically about Charlotte Bronte, because we kind of see it from her point of view. And it talks about their childhoods growing up together and the fantasy worlds they created called Glass Town, which was this magical land where they came up with all the characters and the storylines and sort of worked on it together as a project throughout their childhoods. So we get to see a bit of that, and we also get to see Charlotte as an adult because she was the last left standing of her siblings, looking back on that time, and she also gets to revisit the world of Glass Town, and we get to see the storyline there and also what has happened since its creators grew up and kind of left it behind. This was an amazing book to start the year with because it was 5 stars. It's the second time I've read it and I loved it even more the second time round, so I can now say this is definitely a favourite book of mine. I absolutely adored it, and I think just the perfect amount of time had passed between me last reading it and now, because I'd kind of forgotten all the details, and so I just got to discover it all again, and it was so much fun, and it did make me cry this time around as well. It has this wonderful bittersweet quality to it, which is just like my kryptonite and is the thing that makes me cry more than just like outright tragedy. This has themes of like childhood and growing up and a bit of tragedy and having to say goodbye to childhood things and childhood flights of fancy, but also examining as an adult what that meant to you. And it was just so beautiful. I do think this is maybe just like a perfectly crafted book. It's the kind of book I would actually love to write an essay on. If someone were to ask me to do that, I would love it. I would love to analyse every single detail in the illustration. I think it's really, really beautiful illustration. It's quite sort of sketchy and scratchy in places. It's not like smooth, clean lines and all that kind of stuff, but I really, really loved that. And I really liked the use of colour throughout this. So when the story is taking place in the real world and it's telling, you know, the real historical childhood of these characters, the colour scheme will be like black and white and then sort of one major colour. So it might be brown for some pages, it might be blue in other scenes. But then when you get into the world of Glass Town and the fantasy and the magic world, there's so many colours used on the page and it just makes it feel so vivid and bright and magical. And there are so many just clever choices like that throughout the entire book, which I really, really loved. I could gush on and on about this, but I won't, because there's so many things. I could just list off everything it did and be like, I loved it, I love that, I love this. But just know that I really, really love this book and I would highly recommend it. The next book I read was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This was a really fun thriller murder mystery where we follow a woman called Jessica who is attending her 10-year university reunion. And 10 years ago in her final year of uni, one of her very best friends in her like core friend group was murdered, and everybody kind of knew that it was one of the other guys in the friend group. But then when she arrives at this reunion, she discovers that actually that's not the case and it was someone else in the group, and so she gets to discover what really happened. This was just a really fun time to read. It's very engaging and fast-paced, and the writing just sucks you in immediately, and I was really, really excited to read on and find out what was going to happen next. I really liked Jessica as a main character because she's kind of a bitch. She's quite cold and single-minded and determined and ambitious, and she really wants to show up at this reunion and have everyone be like, oh my god, Jessica, you look amazing, you've done so well in your life. And I really liked that because quite often I think in thriller books the main character is in some ways just like a bit pathetic, and that was definitely not the case with this one. And all the other characters, I liked how the book did a really good job of distinguishing between them. So the rest of the friend group are introduced pretty much all at once. You get a lot of new names and new people sort of thrown at you, but you could tell who everyone was, and their characterization was very different and they were described in very different ways. So I could immediately tell them apart and I wasn't confused and going, who's this person? What's her name again? And so I really liked that you could just get on with it. You were like, here are the characters, we're going on with the mystery now. One thing I didn't really like was there was a specific trope used in this book, which I won't say, but I'll like put it on the screen so you can avoid spoilers. And I was actually about a third of the way through the book before this trope was introduced, which I guess was good because at that point I'd like already committed to reading it and I wasn't going to just stop and give up, but it still did not mean I enjoyed that trope. But the plot itself I really liked. I thought it was very engaging and exciting, and it also jumps a lot between the different time periods. So obviously we have Jessica in the present day trying to solve this murder, but also we get to see her in her first year at university, making friends with all of the other characters and forming this really tight bond, and then also all the way up to her final year and exactly what happened leading up to the murder. And the final twist at the end I did like. And I also really appreciated how I, as the reader, was able to guess it about a page before it was actually revealed, because I think that means the author did a really good job of leaving us breadcrumbs and putting the clues in exactly the right way, that you're able to put it together in a very satisfying way just before the characters themselves realize what's going on. And so I really, really liked that. But of course, there's never just one twist in a book such as this. And so the one sort of right at the end, I didn't see coming, but I did appreciate it. And I thought it was a very interesting way to finish the book. So this was just like a solid, good mystery thriller. I would say like probably 3.5 stars. And I would be interested from reading from this author again. Next, I read In the Land of Invented Languages by Arika Okrent. This is a nonfiction book all about invented languages. I picked this up kind of on a whim last summer because I thought it would be more about things like Klingon and Dothraki and Elvish, so languages which are created for stories like TV, film and books. But actually this was a lot more historical than I was expecting. Did you know that we have records of like 900 constructed languages which people have tried to make throughout history? So this book talks about the main aims and stages of language invention throughout history, all the way through from these guys in the 1600s who wanted to like classify every word so that they could then turn that into a perfect like moral language. And then this also talks about Esperanto and how the aim of that was to create sort of world peace, basically. And I just really, really loved this book. Like, I was really surprised by how much of a good time I had reading it. I thought it was so, so interesting. It's so compelling and it's written very conversationally. So even when it's talking about objectively quite boring things like logic word tables from the 1640s, it was so, so interesting. And I know I found this interesting because I was reading this on my commute on the tube. And when I'm reading a book on the tube, I need it to be something that I can just immediately jump into. I don't have to warm my brain up at all for it. I can just open the next page and immediately pick up where I left off. And that really is a testament to how well written this was and how easy to read it was. And also to how interesting and compelling and engaging it was all the way through. I learned so much from this. I was annoying my colleagues. I would turn up to work in the morning and go, oh my God, can I tell you this fun fact I just learned from my book? And it was like that the entire way through. Like, it really didn't lag towards the end. It never dragged at any point. Maybe there are a few pages of logic verb tables I skipped over, but like the actual text itself was so, so interesting. This is a topic I'm really interested in anyway, languages, but this book was just amazing and so surprising because I didn't expect to like it this much. I'd never heard of most of the stuff in here, so if you're at all interested in languages, I beg of you, please pick this book up. It's so good. The next book I read was Anya's Ghost by Vera Brolskill. This is a YA graphic novel about a teenage girl called Anya who meets a ghost and they become friends. And although everything seems pretty good at first, and it's cool actually to have a ghost friend, this ghost in particular is maybe not that great. This was again a surprise because I read this a while ago, and so I wanted to see if I would enjoy it as much the second time round, and it deserved to stay on my shelves. And it did. I was pleasantly surprised. I really liked how real Anya felt as a character. I think often when reading about teenagers, I just like don't relate to them. I don't care. And I find lots of the stories quite stereotypical and yeah, unrelatable. But that really wasn't the case here, and I liked it. I felt like I could really understand Anya's behaviors and motivations, and actually this book, apart from the paranormal aspect, feels very much just like a realistic slice of life from a typical American teenager. And for the ghostlier aspects, I thought there was a good level of like tension and suspense throughout, and I really enjoyed the story and was having a good time. So I don't have a lot more to say on it. It's not very long, it's not very complex, but I was, pleasantly surprised by it the second time round, and I can say it definitely deserves to stay on my shelves. Then I read 0 Days by Ruth Ware. Unfortunately, didn't really love it. I gave it like a 2.5 star. And every time I read a slightly disappointing Ruth Ware book, I feel like I have to give a disclaimer and be like, but I do really enjoy her writing. And it's true, I do like her writing when it is a more like fast-paced book. I read one of hers last year where it was more like a suspense kind of thriller, and I thought it was really boring. So I was excited to read this because it did sound more action-packed. This follows a woman called Jack, and her husband are employed by companies and businesses to basically break in and like test their security systems and see if they're good enough. So that aspect was exciting. I think the opening scene did come off quite cheesy, but later on in the book, there were a couple of sort of comparable action scenes, I guess, which I enjoyed a lot more. So we're following Jack, and actually her husband is murdered at the beginning of this book, and she is the police's #1 suspect. So she has to go on the run while also trying to find out who his actual killer is. The main thing about this book that didn't work for me is, I would say, the story and the world, it was just very sparse. And by that I mean there were hardly any characters, and therefore there are hardly any suspects. So I found it so easy to guess who the real villain was. And actually I managed to guess it within about 50 pages, because literally I read the dedication of this book, which mentions a theme in the novel, and then there's really only one character I thought was connected to that theme, and then surprise, surprise, it was that character at the end. I was also able to guess when there was a moment where a character is not who they say they are, and I was able to guess that as well. So even though I guessed all the big twists, I did still kind of have a good time because the writing's good and it was exciting in places, and it was very tense, but in like an action kind of tension, not in a boring when are we going to get to anything interesting kind of tension. There were lots of moments which felt genuinely thrilling, and I think this would be quite a good like book to adapt into a film. I would definitely see it, and I think it would probably work a lot better as a film than it actually did as a book, to be honest. So yeah, another slightly disappointing Ruth Ware book. I guess I'm still chasing the thrill I experienced when I read her book One by One. I think that's probably the only book of hers I've given like above a 3-star, to be honest, if I'm remembering correctly. But having said that, again, I like the writing style, I like her writing. I'm gonna keep reading her books even if they continue to disappoint me. Next, I reread This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. This is technically a reread, but I read it like literally almost 10 years ago, so I'd forgotten so much of the detail for this. I read this when I was studying abroad in Germany in the city of Augsburg, and for my first month there, I didn't have any Wi-Fi in the place I was staying, and I was so starved of entertainment that I read this, loved it and gave it 5 stars, and then immediately reread it a second time with like no gap in between. Unfortunately, this time around, I didn't love it that much. I haven't given it 5 stars again. I've given it like a 3 or a 3.5. I'm not 100% certain on that rating yet, and I feel like I just feel a lot more critically towards it now than I did the first time. So this is a paranormal story set in a city in, I guess it's kind of like a futuristic version of our world, but basically in this city, violence creates monsters, and depending on how bad the violence is, sort of a different level of monster is created. There are 3 kinds. The first one is basically like a shadow with teeth. The second kind is basically a vampire, and the third kind is something else entirely. So we follow different characters from different sides of the city. First of all, we have Kate, whose dad is basically like a crime lord who is in charge of half of the city, and if you pay him protection money, he'll protect you from the monsters. And then we have August on the other side of the city, whose dad, his parents, are kind of in charge of trying to fight the monsters, and they're on a bit of like a moral quest, and they're not going to give in to corruption or fear like they think the other half of the city has. And then Kate and August's paths cross, and an adventure ensues. There's quite a heavy theme of like humanity versus being a monster, and what exactly that means to the different characters and who they truly are, but then what they aim to be and how they present themselves to the world. And I think it was trying to say all these very interesting things. Honestly, I was just in it for the actual monsters. But unfortunately, I found their introduction to be quite confusing. There are lots of little references in the first couple of chapters to these different monsters, but it's never really explained. And then we get a sort of big info dump a little ways in, but that in itself was even quite confusing. There's this creepy nursery rhyme, which has like a nice little rhyming couplet for each of the monsters, which some of the characters refer to. And honestly, that nursery rhyme was probably a lot clearer and more useful in learning about the monsters than like any of the other explanation we got. And I felt that the whole introduction of the monsters just felt quite muddy and unclear, and I think it should have been a lot better. The plot of this book, actually in hindsight, I don't think that much really does happen. It takes place over quite a condensed period of time, especially like the last 2/3 of the book take place in like, I don't know, 2 days. And I don't love it when that happens. And actually by the very end, the plot was starting to feel a little bit repetitive, and it felt very much like the characters weren't making decisions and doing things were just happening to them. And it felt very much like the first book in a duology, in that it was just trying to set up the world, introduce the pieces, and then just put them in place for the sequel. And I also didn't love that vibe, especially as the characters at the very end, the places they end up in, it felt very out of character to me for them to make those decisions to end up in those places for book 2. So I guess we'll see how that goes, and we'll see if it makes sense to me in book 2, but in this one I wasn't totally buying it at the very, very end. I feel like I've just said loads of really negative things about this book, but like I did like it. I really liked how absorbing it felt. Again, I read this on the tube and I could just open it and just be absorbed straight into the book without hesitation. It felt very compelling and engaging while I was reading it. And actually a lot of my criticisms I didn't really have until after I'd finished it and was able to sort of look back with a bit of perspective. So it was definitely still a fun time, and it's still a good book, and I'm excited to read the sequel. I guess I'm just disappointed that I didn't love it as much and I didn't give it 5 stars this time around. And then finally, I have reread the first 2 volumes of the Saga graphic novel series by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. This is a sci-fi series about a couple who have fallen in love despite being on opposite sides of this intergalactic war, and they've both sort of defected and run away together and have just had a baby, but now they have to escape. Both sides of the war are trying to hunt them down, and there are other factions involved, and it just gets quite out of hand, and there's lots of different storylines, and it was just a really, really fun time. It's just a really solid sci-fi adventure series, and I really, really loved the world and all the different worlds and all the different alien species that we get introduced to. The word that I kept coming back to was just, it's cool. Like there's no other way to describe it. It's just really cool. And it's exciting and funny and engaging and shocking and graphic at times and emotional at others. The illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. The design is phenomenal. I love the different use of like speech bubbles and texts to sort of distinguish between some of the characters. It's so wonderful. I love the character design in particular of this character called the Stork, who I was just completely obsessed with her design. I think my favorite character overall, I would probably have to say, is maybe Prince Robot IV. I'm very interested in him and his storyline. And then for volume 2, it just like keeps up the pace, it keeps up the momentum. It's fun and funny and engaging, and all of those adjectives I just used. We've got a great new character reveal, which I won't say out loud to spoil. I'll put it on the screen, but I sort of squealed out loud when she appeared on the page and told us her name. And there's also a death question mark, maybe it was a death fake out, I don't remember, but of a character who, when this happened, I like literally out loud was like, oh no, like in that high-pitched voice. I was so distraught that they would try and kill this character, although actually I don't think they did. I think it was a fake out, and then they were alive in the next bit. But like it got me, it was emotional. And even though I don't think the second volume is like quite as incredibly amazing as volume 1, I liked the ending of this a lot more. Like the cliffhanger ending, I thought was just so funny and clever, and I'm really, really excited to continue rereading this series. So yeah, these are all of the books I have read so far this year. Mostly a very, very good time, and I'm really enjoying my reading at the moment. I will quickly say the books I'm currently reading are The Celts, A Very Brief Introduction. I honestly have read like 10 pages of this and then wasn't vibing with it, so I've kind of paused. I'm also, God help me, listening to the audiobook of Fourth Wing, and it's a book, it's happening, I'm reading it. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one.